I'm Paul Sullivan, your host on the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, sublime, strange, and silly aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men are not always the primary parents. One thing I know from personal experience is being a lead dad is not a traditional role for men. Parenting is so often left to mothers or paid caregivers. But here at the Company of Dads, our goal is to shake all that off and create a community for fathers who have stepped up to be the lead dad and for other dads who want to learn from them. Today, my guest is Jill Castle, childhood nutrition expert and founder of the Nourished Child. Jill graduated from Indiana University with a nutrition science degree. She then moved to Boston to begin her internship at Massachusetts General Hospital. She was hired there and worked with hospitalized children. Later, she moved to Boston Children's Hospital. She's also a mother of 4, and here's where theory meets practice. She's admitted it wasn't always easy for her to get her own children to eat. Since they're all adults now, she figured it out, but her journey as a professional and a parent should be instructive to all of us. Jill, welcome to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Paul.
All right, I want to start off with something here before I go into the questions, give you a chance to talk about something I know is near and dear to you. You just sold a book. Tell me about it. What's the book about? What's the working title? When's the expected pub date?
Well, I don't have answers to all of those questions, but the working title is called Size Wise: How to Nourish and Build Healthy Habits in Children at Every Size, from Preschool to Preteen. And it is a nutrition and habit building book with a special emphasis on how we talk to our children who are in different sized bodies, how we include them, how we create acceptance of diverse bodies, and build children with a great self-esteem so that we're not only nourishing them for physical health, but we are also nurturing their emotional well-being.
Yeah. I mean, is it, I'm going to not really go out on a limb here, but is that something that came directly out of your practice as a nutritionist, or how did that become the topic of your first book?
It started with my desire to want to write a book about childhood obesity or children just growing up in bigger bodies, and how to help parents sort of navigate that tricky topic. But as I started looking at sort of our cultural norms, for example, our culture believes that thin and fit is equal to healthy, but there are larger bodied people who are healthy, and there are smaller bodied people who are also healthy, but there's this discrimination and stigma around body size. And when I realized that children in smaller bodies also experience the same type of stigmatization, and parents who are raising underweight children who aren't growing well, they have the same anxiety and stressors as parents who are raising larger bodied children. And the reality is, we have, I think it's 14.5 million children who are in larger bodies and 2 million children in smaller bodies. And we only have 77 million children in the United States anyway. So about 20 to 25% of our kids are not sort of the mid-sized body that we say is, that is desirable. And so rather than sort of focusing on this child has a problem and we need to change this child, it's really adopting a whole family approach to nourishing and building the habits that will lead to a healthy lifestyle, no matter what your body size is. Like if you're getting enough sleep, you're moving enough, you're eating well, you take care of yourself, you can grow up and be a healthy person, no matter your size.
Because that's always been your emphasis as a nutritionist.
Yeah.
It's always on health. It's not on, it kind of ties in really well with this moment of wellness. Have you found that, during the pandemic, that it was harder for children to eat healthy? As I become a late night snacker, which I know is not good, but I'm trying to break myself of that habit. But I mean, what were some of the effects that the pandemic had on children and their health? That's
a great question. So with the stay-at-home orders, more children were schooling from home. We know more snacking. Snacking has increased amongst children. Ultra-processed food consumption has increased. So we're talking more like sweets and treats, that kind of thing. From that, we know that more children are struggling with their body weight. But even above and beyond that, emotional well-being, mental health issues have really skyrocketed since the pandemic. So we can't, I don't feel like as a healthcare professional, I don't think that we can just continue to bang the drum of raising a physically healthy child. I think we have to look at the whole child, that whatever we're doing in terms of changing food or changing our feeding approaches or emphasizing exercise, we have to do it with a mindset that focuses also on the fact that we're raising kids who have self-esteem and body image and emotional, an emotional state that should be moving down the road to well-being, not just focused on physical health.
Yeah, I know one of the things you talked about there, and I know you focus on this more generally, is the whole family and that family unit. And I think, as you know, you're a mom of 4, I'm a dad of 3, and parenting is some combination of exhausting and exhilarating, and making healthy meals can fall into that exhausting category. What are some of the simple things for parents to keep in mind, meal after meal, night after night, week after week, month after month? I mean, how should they look at what they're trying to do on the spectrum? We all love kale, but we can't have kale every meal of every day.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think simple is always good, especially when it comes to kids. And I know you know this, but kids love to be able to identify what they're eating. They want to know what it is and identify it by looking at it. And so, making nutritious meals that are pretty straightforward and simple. I think parents tend to think that they need to be complicated and involved. And the truth is, while you don't necessarily want to serve a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and orange slices and carrot sticks and milk every night for dinner, a simple meal like that is equally as nourishing as something that's more complicated. So that's the first thing, like recognizing that you don't have to be super complex with your meal planning.
When you think of like 2 or 3 top simple meals that are nourishing for the child and the whole family, what are 2 or 3 that come to mind?
I think, a dish that involves pasta with a protein source like chicken or beans is great. Fish, if your children can eat it, and then pairing that with whatever fruit your child likes. It can be canned, it can be frozen, it can be fresh. Raw vegetables, a lettuce wedge, something simple, especially if your child isn't a big vegetable eater, starting with the simple vegetables like even raw asparagus. Kids like raw vegetables that can be paired with a dip, a wedge of lettuce with some salad dressing. And then always, I prefer a nutritious beverage to accompany meals. I tend to go with milk. A lot of people might choose something different. If they choose an alternative to milk, just make sure it has protein in it and it's fortified with calcium and vitamin D, so it adds some meaningful nutrition to your child's meal. And again, I always, when I'm planning my meals, I start with a protein source. So is it chicken? Is it beef? Is it fish? Is it beans? Is it nut butter? Is it eggs? Is it cheese? So that protein is really satiating for a child. It will fill up their belly. It will help them make it to the next meal or the next snack. And then round out from there. Whole grains, preferably like brown rice or whole wheat pasta or whole wheat bread or rolls. Fruit and vegetable. A lot of parents think vegetable with meals, but I'm like fruit and vegetable. So if your child won't eat the vegetable, you've got the fruit and the nutrients from the fruit that are very similar to those of vegetables.
If you think of, 21 meals in a week, if a parent, wanted to establish a good, win-loss record, what would that look like for, really having successful meals where you feel like the kid ate something nutritious versus the ones where, you're not going to win every game?
Yeah, I think if you're getting 2 good meals into your child a day, you're doing pretty well. Get a good solid snack into your child a day, you're doing really well.
Okay. All right, good. When I think about, cardinal sins, I mean, are there any, cardinal sins for feeding a child? I mean, my doctor's telling me, don't order swordfish and I've already copped to some, late night stress eating. He said, Paul, lay off the cheese. Your cholesterol doesn't need any more cheese. Are there cardinal sins that parents make when it comes to feeding their children, that if they just knew it was a bad idea, maybe they could stop doing it?
Yeah. So when it comes to food, I think, and feeding, it's the techniques, the interactions between children that cause more problems, I think, than the food itself. So pressuring kids
the interaction, like amongst their siblings or amongst their peers?
No, the parent,
parent to kid. Okay.
And the parent and the child. And we call that feeding, right? So we've got food, which is actually the food that we eat. We have feeding, which is the interaction between the parent and the child. So take another bite, finish your meal before you leave. Don't forget, your milk is right there. Make sure you drink it. Ooh. These are called pressure to eat. Uh-huh. It's a feeding technique that many parents do, and it's counterproductive. If you have a picky eater, it can make the picky eater be turned off and refuse to eat. If you have a child who's really willing to do whatever you say, it can override their appetite and actually encourage them to overeat. And over time, children get trained to overeat when we do that. So pressure to eat, I would say, is a cardinal sin that many, many parents are doing. The other one I would say is rewarding with food. So sort of saying, if you finish your dinner, you can have dessert. Right. If you're good at the doctor's office, you can have a lollipop. If you get good grades, I'll take you out for ice cream. Right. So these are food rewards that basically change the hierarchy of food in a child's mind. So a lot of times as parents, we think that if we promise or bribe with dessert, we will change our children's food preferences to prefer things like vegetables. Yeah. But the opposite is true. They actually like vegetables less when we do that, and like the sweets and the treats more. So I would say those are the two big ones.
I get the, the second one for sure. You want your children to be intrinsically motivated. You want them to get good grades in school because they like to learn. You don't want them to do that because they get mint chocolate chip ice cream. But the other one, I could see that being, and I've probably surely been guilty of it. If you are, you're feeding a child, you want them to have that protein source. And, if you got a glass of milk there, you want them to drink that milk. But, if meal after meal, they eat, just the rice, or they just eat the pasta, or they don't eat at all. I think you admitted to you on your own that you struggle with your own children when they're young to get them to eat healthy. What do you do? Because that's coming from, I understand, like, hey, you get a scoop of ice cream for every A, that's bad. But the whole point of like, hey, look, you got some chicken here, you got some rice here, you got some, cucumbers, and you got a glass of milk. Let's try to eat a little bit of all of that. Tell me how you sort of get your kids to eat a balanced meal without pressuring them and creating problems down the road.
Yeah, it's a great question. So structure helps a lot in terms of the timing of meals, and making sure that you have sort of routine times for your main meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and routine times for your snacks. One of the mistakes that I see parents make is that snacks are not routine. They're kind of like whenever the child asks for them, then we do a snack. Yeah. And that can interfere with the child's appetite when they come to the meal. The second thing is make your healthy meal, preferably serve it family style. And we can talk about what that means if you want. But serve it family style, which means that the child can choose what goes on their plate, and they can choose how much goes on their plate, and don't make anything else. Like, this is it. This is the meal, right?
We do that. All right. Now I'm feeling a little better. We do that. And when you mean family style, you mean let them scoop the amount of chicken they want. Let them scoop the amount. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And your job is to actually prepare the meal, but also plan out that balanced meal. Like, you've got all the main food groups there. And then as your child is making their own plate, they're more likely to eat what they put on their plate because they're choosing from what you've put out there what they want to eat. If they don't finish, if they don't choose everything, then, the meal is over and you move on to the next one. There's sort of natural consequences that get built into whether your child, eats or not. That's really their prerogative and their right. But what can happen is that you close the kitchen after that meal, and there is no more food until the next scheduled snack or meal. And for some families, it might not be until breakfast the next morning. And what happens is the child learns to eat what you've offered at mealtime. They intrinsically learn that if they don't eat, if they don't have a good meal, they will feel hungry and uncomfortable, and they'll have to wait with that hunger and that uncomfortability. It won't happen very often. Most kids are able to sort of learn quickly that dinner time is the time to make sure they eat. Now, when you're doing your mealtime, though, you're not sort of making tons of food just in case that they might not eat, or you're making only their food that they like to eat,
right? Because
you fear that they won't eat. You're really trying to model and create exposure to new foods, and keep in mind that, you know, 1 or 2 foods on the plate should be something that your child is willing to eat, but that you're moving ahead with the whole, my job is to expose this child to lots of different foods. I understand that not everything's going to be a hit, but this is what we're doing. And kids fall in line.
Okay. What about when we have, you know, sort of, you think of times in our lives that are not our normal routine. I mean, it's summertime now, so, you know, lots more treats and snacks are going to get foisted on kids. You know, you go away on a vacation, it's you know, fun. You know, mom and dad are having a rum punch. You know, what does a kid get? How do you manage, you know, those moments?
Yeah. So I've always believed that vacation was sort of like, we're off our routine and we're embracing it. And, you know, honestly, truth be told, when our family would go on vacation, it was the Pepperidge Farm white bread. It was the Cocoa Crispy cereal. It was the stuff I did not put in the house. And my children really enjoyed the fact that vacation meant vacation food. So we just embraced it. And then when we come home, we'd be like, we're back on our home food. You know, we're back in our routine of, I don't buy Cocoa Krispies.
You're a well-regarded nutritionist. How could you buy them? Did you have to send your husband in to buy the Cocoa Puffs in case anybody saw you there?
Oh yeah. He's the one that started that whole thing anyways. Yes. But you know what? For a week on vacation,
sure,
why not?
Yeah.
Noodles and cheese puffs and all the stuff, Paul. And so then when we would come home, we would be, you know, back onto our healthy meals. The other thing I decided when I was a much younger mother was that I wasn't going to really have tons of sweets and treats in the house regularly, because I was watching my kids get them all the time on the soccer fields, at school parties, at Girl Scouts, at church. And I was like, this is nuts. So I just was like, I'm not going to worry about what they get outside of the home. I just know that my home, inside my home, is going to be more like a health haven. You know, it's going to be more nutritious. That worked for us. What I find with parents today is they are reacting to the scenarios that are placed in front of them, and they don't have a strategy. They haven't thought through sort of, what am I going to do if my child has cupcakes at sports, and then they're going to a birthday party, and then we have a big family dinner at the end of the night, and I know there's going to be dessert. Like, parents need to anticipate those scenarios so they have a plan or a strategy to deal with it. So
that's a common occurrence. What would a good plan be for something like that, so that you don't, you know, give your kid a complex or say, look, I know you had 3 parties today, you know, why can't you have 3 cupcakes? I don't know the answer to that. So what do you,
so the day of, you're just really letting your child embrace that fun day. And then the subsequent days, you're dialing it in. You're like, we're not, you know, at home, we're having healthy, nutritious food. So you're sort of engaging, and then you're taking a break. You're engaging, you're taking a break. And it's that flexibility. And, you know, that mindset of, overall, I want my child to eat nutritious foods and have a good, healthy diet, but I also don't want to create a scenario where my child is feeling like they can't participate, because that has its own emotional ramifications too. And so it's that flexibility of in and out, and taking the leadership role of, this is how we do it. So if we're going to do all of this, this is what we're going to do for the next couple of days. And it's the clear communication of this is what we're doing.
But, when your own kids were young, when it got a little out of hand, would you go into the crisper and pull out the stalk of kale and wave it at them? And they knew, like when mom pulls out the kale, no more cupcake?
No.
Right.
I never had to do that. In my house, we talked about food a lot in very non-pressuring ways. It was just because of the work I do. It was, a conversation that came up a lot. And that, raising 4 kids, I knew I had a long-term view. I knew that we weren't going to get it all right every single day, but I knew that by the time they were 18 and went off to college, they needed to know how to eat well. They needed to know the components of a nutritious meal. They needed to know how to cook for themselves. They needed to understand their appetite. They needed to be able to care for themselves in that manner. And so when you think about that long-term view, it releases and frees you a little bit from the day-to-day blips that are going to happen to anyone.
Right. Yeah. I like the way you phrase that. Like, there's going to be a big party some Saturday, there are going to be 3 parties, and let it go. You're going to go on vacation for a week or 2 each year, let it go. But, here's a question. My kids go to a summer camp, and, the menu is a whole bunch of stuff I wouldn't want to eat when it's 95 degrees out, but it's pasta, pizza, chicken fingers, all heavy stuff. In a scenario like that, where that's what's being offered, day after day, week after week, do you pack the lunch for the kids? Do you have a discussion around it? How do you sort of manage something where you think, at least one meal a day is going to be, fairly unhealthy and lacking in nutrition?
Yeah. Sitting down with your children, if they're old enough, and talking about, what do you notice about this menu? And that's a great phrase to use when you're feeding kids, even if you're starting with new foods on the table. What do you notice about XYZ? What do you notice about broccoli? What do you notice about this asparagus? What do you know about this? What do you notice about this menu for camp? What do you see here? And your child might be like, oh my God, it's all my favorite foods. That's certainly possible. I know, exactly. But have a conversation and just, what do you notice is missing? And your child might say, there's no fruit here. I don't see any vegetables. Well, what can we do about that? Do you have any suggestions? Having these conversations with your children in this way, where you're asking questions, really gets the wheels turning in their brains and helps them be part of the solution. So ask them, what would you do? What do you think we should do? Your child might come up with the answer. They might say, I think I should bring a bag of carrots every day. I love carrots. I think I should bring them. Or they might say, well, when I get home, I need to just make sure I have a healthy snack. Well, what would that be? Maybe some berries and some yogurt, or maybe some, vegetables and cheese. So when your child's in a situation where the food isn't as healthy, try to partner with them and create a solution. Because if they're part of the solution, they're going to be more willing to participate and carry that solution through.
I know throughout this conversation, I always think of, food is fuel. Hopefully it tastes good, all this, but I know you've done some research, and you're a real expert on how food should be, paired or thought about for children with ADHD. Maybe talk a little bit about that, how food takes on a different meaning or use with a child who has ADHD. Right.
So we know that with ADHD, it's a brain-based learning and behavioral challenge for some children. Executive functioning skills is also a challenge. And we know that the brain is its operation, the fuel for its operation is food and nutrients. And so with children who have ADHD, there's a couple of challenges that they might be facing. Number one is being on medications that dampen their appetite and make them not hungry. And so for parents, it can be a real challenge to get the nutrition, that nutritious diet on board for them. And so you're really sort of working around their non-hungry period and maximizing all the meals that happen around that period of time. From a nutrient standpoint, protein is very important. Fat is important, particularly plant fats that have omega-3 fatty acids, which really do help the brain sort of process. Carbohydrates, all the nutrients are important in that the brain functions optimally when it's getting sort of a regular injection of nutrients. And that goes back to that structure with meals and snacks. The every 3 to 4 hours, there's a meal or a snack, and it's sort of very routine. That's not only to just fill the belly with food and nutrients, it's to also make sure that the brain is getting sort of that regular injection of fuel as that child is moving throughout the day. So, regular rhythm around meals and snacks, making sure foods, for example, I always advise that children have a protein source in each meal and snack throughout the day. It doesn't have to be a ton of protein, but it needs to be a little bit of protein there just because it helps them be more attentive and pay attention. So yeah, I mean, feeding children with ADHD can be challenging, particularly if their medications are impacting their appetite, but there are workarounds.
Yeah. Jill, this has been great. Thank you for being my guest on the Company of Dads podcast. I always like to give the guest the last word. Anything I didn't ask that you want to make sure the listeners hear?
Well, I just want to say that because this is the Company of Dads, I just want to say that there is a lot of research coming out that is now focused on fathers in the realm of food and feeding. And so it's a really interesting time for research in childhood nutrition because we are starting to look at fathers and are they different when they feed their children than mothers? And it's interesting. So
you can't leave us hanging. What's the answer? What's the preliminary research show?
Well, some of the newer research shows that fathers tend to be a little bit more controlling with feeding than mothers do. And so what that basically means is that if you haven't thought, if you're a dad and you're a primary caretaker and you haven't learned about feeding your child in terms of that interaction we talked about before, this is a really good time to start learning about that because it affects how your child views themselves as an eater, but also it affects your child's relationship with food. Do they like to come to the table? Do they feel good about eating? Do they feel good about food? Is it something they enjoy and they embrace? Or is it drudgery? Is it filled with criticism? Is it something that is a negative in their life? And we don't want to create that for a child, whether we're a father or a mother. Sure. But what is interesting is that the research, because I think of the pandemic and more dads at home, the research is starting to look at, when mothers feed children, we know that there are certain, impacts in that area. But now we're seeing that fathers have a slightly different impact. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah. It's just that fathers are different and they have a different impact on their children. And it's very interesting. I think we'll see that in other realms of health and behavior as well.
Well, I have to ask you, because you didn't bring this up, but whenever I take my kids out for ice cream, they they know what's coming next, and that's the dad tax, where I swoop in with my spoon and take all the. Is that okay? Is that all right when I
think that sounds like
the dad tax?
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really fun memory that you're creating with your kids.
Jill Castle, founder of the Nourished Child. Thank you again for being my guest. I really enjoyed our chat.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.